Think about the last time you put on a pair of glasses, fastened a button on your shirt, or glanced at a clock to check the time. These moments feel utterly ordinary, right? But what if I told you that without the brilliant minds of the medieval world, none of these everyday conveniences would exist? The Middle Ages, often dismissed as a dark and stagnant period, were actually a hotbed of innovation, filled with inventions so revolutionary that they've quietly woven themselves into the fabric of our modern lives. From the tools we use to the systems we rely on, medieval ingenuity is all around us, hiding in plain sight. Picture this: a world where time was measured by the sun's shadow, where clothing was held together by knots and pins, and where reading was a luxury reserved for those with perfect eyesight. It's almost impossible to imagine, yet that was the reality before medieval inventors stepped in. These weren't just small tweaks to existing ideas. They were leaps of creativity that transformed how people lived, worked, and even thought. The clock, for instance, didn't just tell time. It reshaped society, paving the way for schedules, commerce, and the very rhythm of daily life as we know it. And those humble buttons, they revolutionized fashion, making clothing more secure, adjustable, and even expressive. These weren't just practical solutions, they were sparks of genius that lit the way to the modern world. So why does this matter to you? Because every time you use a fork, walk across a drawbridge-inspired design, or even play a game of chess, you're touching a piece of history that's still alive today. The medieval era wasn't just a bridge between ancient and modern times, it was a workshop of ideas, many of which are still in use centuries later. In this video, we're going to uncover 30 of these astonishing inventions, each one a testament to human creativity and adaptability. Some will surprise you with their simplicity, others with their sheer cleverness, but all of them will leave you with a newfound appreciation for the unseen hands of the past that still guide our present. Ready to discover how much of your life is secretly medieval? Let's begin. Imagine living in a world where fading eyesight meant the end of your career, where artisans could no longer carve intricate details, scholars struggled to decipher manuscripts, and aging craftsmen were forced to retire simply because their vision blurred. This was the stark reality before an ingenious invention emerged from 13th century Italy: eyeglasses. The earliest spectacles were simple yet revolutionary: two convex lenses mounted in frames that balanced on the nose. Crafted by monks or skilled glassmakers in Pisa, these early versions magnified text, allowing weary eyes to continue reading and working. What began as a luxury for the educated elite soon trickled down to tradespeople, extending careers and preserving knowledge that might otherwise have been lost to time. The impact was profound. Suddenly, a scholar in their 50s could study as intently as a young apprentice. A clockmaker's hands didn't tremble over tiny gears because they could see them clearly. Even scribes, whose livelihoods depended on precision, found new longevity in their craft. By the Renaissance, glasses had evolved into a status symbol: round, wire-rimmed designs perched on the noses of philosophers and merchants in portraits, signaling both wisdom and modernity. Fast forward to today, and this medieval innovation has become universal. From sleek blue light blockers to prescription sunglasses, the core design remains remarkably unchanged. But here's what's even more fascinating. Glasses didn't just correct vision, they reshaped society's relationship with aging and ability. They quietly dismantled the idea that declining eyesight meant declining value, proving that a simple tool could unlock human potential across generations. Next time you adjust your frames or clean a smudged lens, remember, you're wearing a piece of medieval brilliance that quite literally helped the world see things differently. Now, let's turn to another everyday object with surprising medieval roots, one that holds everything together, quite literally, the humble button. Before buttons, getting dressed was an ordeal. Imagine tugging at laces that never stayed tight, or pricking your fingers on sharp pins just to keep your tunic closed. Then, in the 13th century, a small revolution stitched its way into history: buttons. At first, they were purely decorative, tiny works of art sewn onto the sleeves of wealthy nobles as a display of status. But it didn't take long for someone to realize these little discs could do more than dazzle. By adding a loop or a slit of fabric, buttons became fasteners, and clothing would never be the same. Suddenly, garments could hug the body instead of hanging loose. Tailors began crafting fitted sleeves, snug doublets, and layered outfits that stayed in place. No more awkward adjustments or wardrobe malfunctions. This wasn't just about convenience, it was a fashion revolution. For the first time, clothing could accentuate the human form, paving the way for everything from Renaissance corsets to modern blazers. Buttons even played a role in social change. Unlike pins, which required assistance to fasten, buttons let people dress themselves, giving them a new independence. What's truly remarkable is how little the design has changed. The buttonholes in your coat today work exactly like those from 700 years ago. Medieval artisans perfected the balance of size, shape, and attachment so well that we've barely improved on it. From the delicate pearl buttons on a wedding gown to the rugged snaps on a work jacket, this medieval invention is still holding our world together, one tiny fastener at a time. And speaking of precision, our next invention didn't just change how we dress, it changed how we measure our days. The mechanical clock didn't just tell time, it reinvented it. Before mechanical clocks, time was a fluid thing measured by the sun's arc, the slow drip of water, or the burning of candles. But medieval monks faced a problem. How could they gather for prayers 7 times a day, from matins before dawn to compline at night, without a reliable way to track the hours? Their solution would change the world. In the 14th century, tucked away in European monasteries, the first weight-driven clocks began to tick. These weren't just crude noisemakers, they were intricate machines, powered by falling weights and regulated by escapements, those clever little mechanisms that release energy in precise, rhythmic bursts. For the first time in history, humans had created a device that could count the hours independently of nature's whims. The implications were staggering. Towns soon adopted these towering timekeepers, installing them in church steeples where their chimes could organize daily life. Markets opened at set hours, laborers worked by the clock, and punctuality became a virtue rather than an accident. This was more than convenience, it was a cultural earthquake. The medieval clock didn't just measure time, it taught people to think in segments of hours and minutes, laying the groundwork for the modern obsession with schedules and productivity. What's truly remarkable is how little the core mechanics have changed. The gears and escapements in those early clocks are direct ancestors of the ones in your wristwatch or smartphone. Even today's atomic clocks, which measure the vibrations of cesium atoms, follow the same fundamental principle, breaking time into measurable, repeatable units. The next time you glance at your phone to check the hour, remember, you're witnessing the legacy of medieval monks who simply wanted to pray on time. Now, let's talk about another medieval innovation that might be brewing in your kitchen right now: coffee. Long before buzzing coworking spaces or laptop-filled cafes, there was a quieter revolution brewing in the shadows of medieval minarets. The world's first coffeehouses didn't just serve a stimulating drink. They became the social media of their age, buzzing with gossip, debate, and groundbreaking ideas. In 15th century Mecca, tucked between spice stalls and silk markets, these dimly lit spaces offered something radical: a place where anyone with the price of a cup could sit for hours, trading news or dissecting philosophy. Unlike taverns where alcohol blurred minds, coffee sharpened them, turning patrons into lively conversationalists. Merchants haggled over contracts, scholars debated astronomy, and poets recited verses to rapt audiences, all fueled by the bitter, energizing brew. When coffeehouses reached Constantinople, their influence exploded. The Ottoman Empire's grand schools of the wise, as they were called, became incubators for innovation. Artists sketched designs between sips, diplomats exchanged secrets over steaming cups, and even the Sultan's spies lurked in corners, eavesdropping on plots. These weren't just businesses, they were democratic spaces where class barriers temporarily dissolved. A tailor could challenge a vizier's opinion, provided his argument held water. By the time coffee crept into Europe, the model was set. A café was never just about the drink. London's penny universities, where a penny bought coffee and a lecture birthed scientific societies. Parisian salons brewed revolutions alongside espresso. Even today, whether it's a startup team brainstorming in a Brooklyn cafe or activists plotting change in a Cairo kawa, the medieval coffeehouse's DNA endures, proof that the best ideas often percolate in shared spaces over shared cups. Now let's shift from intellectual sparks to playful ones. Our next invention reveals how medieval minds turned strategy into sport, the enduring game of chess. Think of the last time you shuffled a deck of cards, maybe for a family game night or a round of solitaire. Those 52 pieces of cardboard are far more than just a way to pass the time. They're a medieval invention that survived wars, crossed continents, and adapted to countless cultures. The story begins in 14th century Europe, when merchants traveling the Silk Road brought back more than just spices and silks. Islamic traders carried with them beautifully illustrated cards, originally used for games and storytelling in the Middle East. European craftsmen quickly saw their potential, but they didn't just copy the designs, they reinvented them. The intricate arabesques and calligraphy of Islamic cards transformed into the familiar hearts, diamonds, clubs, and spades we know today. At first, playing cards were a luxury, hand-painted with gold leaf and reserved for nobility. But as paper-making spread across Europe, decks became affordable and wildly popular. Taverns buzzed with card games, churches condemned them as moral corruptors, and kings banned them to prevent distracted soldiers from gambling away their armor. Yet nothing could stop their rise. By the Renaissance, cards had become a mirror of society. The King of Hearts represented Charlemagne, the Queen of Spades evoked the goddess Athena, and the humble Jack symbolized the everyman. Even the four suits reflected medieval life: hearts for the church, diamonds for merchants, clubs for agriculture, and spades for the military. What's truly remarkable is how these simple cards became a canvas for cultural exchange. The Spanish swapped swords for cups, the Germans added bells and acorns, and the French streamlined the designs we still use today. But their influence goes beyond games. Magicians use them to dazzle audiences, psychologists rely on them for memory tests, and mathematicians study probability through their shuffles. That deck in your drawer isn't just a game, it's a 700-year-old artifact of human creativity, adapting endlessly to every era it touches. Now, let's turn to another medieval innovation that solved a problem we still face today: how to keep things cold without modern appliances. The answer lies in an invention as clever as it is simple: the icehouse. The next time you twist a key in a lock or spin the dial on a safe, take a moment to appreciate the medieval minds who made it possible. In the 14th century, as bustling English towns grew richer and merchants needed to protect their goods, a brilliant solution emerged: the tumbler lock. Unlike earlier locks, which could often be picked with little more than a stiff piece of metal, this new design used a series of pins and springs that only aligned perfectly with the correct key. Insert the wrong one and the pins would jam, refusing to budge. It was a stroke of mechanical genius that turned security into a puzzle only the rightful owner could solve. What's astonishing is how little the core concept has changed. Modern padlocks, deadbolts, and even high-security safes still rely on variations of that same medieval mechanism. The Tumbler lock's enduring success lies in its elegant simplicity, the way it turns precision into protection. Locksmiths of the time didn't just craft metal, they engineered trust. A merchant could now leave his warehouse knowing his silks and spices were safe, or a noblewoman could secure her jewelry without constant vigilance. This wasn't just about preventing theft, it was about enabling commerce, privacy, and peace of mind in an increasingly interconnected world. But the lock's legacy goes deeper. Its invention marked a shift in how society viewed personal property and security. Before Tumbler locks, safeguarding valuables often meant hiding them or posting guards, solutions that were either unreliable or expensive. With this new technology, security became accessible. Townspeople could invest in sturdy chests, shopkeepers could protect their earnings, and travelers could secure their belongings on long journeys. The Tumbler lock didn't just secure doors, it helped lay the groundwork for modern banking, warehousing, and even urban development. After all, what's a city without places people can trust to be safe? So the next time you hear a lock click shut, remember, you're not just securing a door, you're participating in a 700-year-old tradition of ingenuity, one that turned medieval craftsmanship into the bedrock of modern security. And speaking of foundations, our next invention didn't just protect wealth, it helped build the world, quite literally, from the ground up. Think about the last time you moved a pile of dirt, hauled bricks, or carried a heavy load across your backyard. Now imagine doing all that without one simple tool, the wheelbarrow. While its origins trace back to ancient China, it was medieval Europeans who transformed this humble cart into the one-handed powerhouse we know today. Picture a 13th century monk, his robes dusty from labor, pushing a wooden wheelbarrow loaded with stones up a cathedral construction site. Before this innovation, moving heavy materials required two people, one to lift, another to steady the load. But with a single wheel out front and curved arms to balance the weight, a solitary worker could now transport what once took a team. The impact was immediate. Monasteries, the innovation hubs of their day, adopted wheelbarrows to speed up the building of towering cathedrals and sprawling gardens. Stonemasons could move cut blocks faster, farmers shifted harvests with less strain, and even soldiers used them to fortify castle walls under siege. The design was so effective that it barely changed for centuries. Just swap the medieval wooden wheel for a pneumatic tire, and you've got the same trusty tool in modern hardware stores. What made it revolutionary wasn't just efficiency, it democratized labor. Suddenly, one person could achieve what once required multiple hands, reshaping everything from construction to agriculture. But here's the twist, the wheelbarrow did more than lighten loads, it altered how people thought about work. By reducing physical strain, it extended careers, allowing aging craftsmen to stay productive. It even influenced architecture, enabling grander designs since materials could be moved with newfound ease. Today, whether you're mixing concrete or planting flowers, you're relying on medieval ingenuity every time you grip those handles. And while we've added steel and ergonomic grips, the soul of the design remains untouched, a testament to how perfectly medieval minds solved a problem we still face. Now, let's turn from heavy lifting to a lighter but equally enduring invention, the humble filing system that keeps our thoughts in order. in the quiet scriptoriums of medieval monasteries, where scribes spent years painstakingly copying texts by candlelight, a small but brilliant solution emerged to a universal problem: how to keep your place in a book. Before the printing press, manuscripts were rare treasures, often hundreds of pages long, with no page numbers or tables of contents. Losing your spot meant tedious searching through dense parchment. The answer: the humble bookmark. At first, these were simple strips of vellum or silk ribbons sewn into the bindings, but they soon became indispensable tools. A scribe could mark a passage to revisit. A scholar could pause mid-argument without fear of losing their train of thought. And even wealthy patrons began commissioning elaborate bookmarks adorned with gold leaf and gemstones as status symbols. What's fascinating is how this invention adapted to every reading revolution that followed. When books became smaller and more portable, bookmarks evolved too, into pressed flowers, painted cards, even locks of hair tucked between pages. The Victorian era turned them into sentimental art, embroidered with heartfelt messages. Today, whether it's a dog-eared corner, a magnetic clip, or a digital highlight on your e-reader, the essence remains the same: a momentary pause made permanent. In an age of endless scrolling, the medieval bookmark reminds us that some ideas are too good to lose in the shuffle. Now, let's turn from quiet contemplation to something that filled medieval halls with sound, an innovation that would shape music for centuries to come: the musical staff. Imagine a world where every musician played by ear, where melodies existed only in memory, vanishing as soon as the last note faded. That was the reality until an 11th century monk named Guido d'Arezzo had a revolutionary idea. What if music could be written down like words? His solution, a series of horizontal lines and spaces representing pitch, became the foundation of the modern musical staff. Suddenly, a choir could sing in harmony without relying on guesswork. Composers could preserve their work for future generations, and complex polyphony flourished. The impact was profound. Cathedrals echoed with precisely notated Gregorian chants. Troubadours carried written songs across borders, and for the first time, music became a universal language that could be shared, studied, and perfected. Guido even invented solfege, the do-re-mi system, to teach his monks faster. Today, whether you're reading sheet music for a Beethoven symphony or strumming chords from a pop songbook, you're using a medieval invention that turned fleeting sounds into enduring art. The next time you hum a tune, remember those 5 lines on a page are the reason melodies from 700 years ago can still move us today. Before Guido d'Arezzo's breakthrough, music was like a whispered secret, passed from teacher to student, vanishing the moment the last note faded. Imagine a world where every symphony, every folk tune, every lullaby existed only in memory, changing slightly with each retelling. Then came the monk's simple yet staggering idea: what if we could trap sound on parchment? In the early 11th century, Guido sketched 4 parallel lines, later expanded to 5, and assigned each space and line a precise pitch. Suddenly, melodies could be frozen in time, shared across continents, and perfected over generations. This wasn't just notation, it was a time machine for sound. The ripple effects were extraordinary. For the first time, a composer in Paris could write a motet, and a choir in Florence could sing it exactly as intended. Polyphony flourished, with intertwining voices dancing across the staff like threads in a tapestry. Even Guido's teaching tools endure. His ut-re-mi syllables evolved into the do-re-mi scale we still use to train voices today. But the real magic lies in how this system democratized music. No longer the domain of elite oral traditions, complex compositions could now be learned by anyone who could read those Inkai symbols. Fast forward to today, and Guido's lines are the skeleton of every pop song chart, every film score, every jazz improvisation transcribed for posterity. When Beethoven scratched notes onto parchment as his hearing faded, or when a teenager uploads a melody to GarageBand, they're relying on the same medieval framework. Those 5 lines didn't just preserve music, they gave it a shared language, turning fleeting vibrations into monuments of human creativity. Now, let's step from the soaring heights of music to something decidedly more down-to-earth, but no less revolutionary. Picture a rainy day in 14th century London where cobbled streets turned to rivers of mud. Without a solution for soggy feet, townsfolk faced ruined shoes and perpetual dampness. Enter the medieval cobblers who stitched together scraps of leather into the first functional galoshes. These weren't the sleek rubber boots of today, but they shared the same goal, keeping feet dry. Wealthy merchants lined theirs with fur, while laborers made do with waxed canvas, but the principle was universal. A simple overshoe could transform a miserable trek into a tolerable one. What's striking is how this humble innovation mirrored larger societal shifts. As medieval cities grew denser, so did the need for practical urban living. Dry feet meant healthier citizens, no small thing in an era when dampness could lead to illness. By the Renaissance, variations of these waterproof coverings appeared across Europe, from Venetian patterns elevating ladies above flooded piazzas to Dutch fishermen's tarred boots. Today's rain boots, with their cheerful patterns and grippy soles, are direct descendants of that medieval pragmatism. So the next time you splash through a puddle without a second thought, thank those nameless cobblers who decided enough was enough and literally lifted their society out of the mud. Now, let's turn to an invention that didn't just protect feet but transformed how we move through the world, the humble but mighty horseshoe. In the 12th century, as trade routes stretched across continents and knights crisscrossed kingdoms, one innovation kept the medieval world galloping forward, literally. Horses were the engines of their day, pulling plows, carrying messengers, and charging into battle. But rough terrain and cobblestones wore down their hooves, leaving them lame and useless. The solution: iron shoes nailed to a horse's feet, a practice borrowed from nomadic tribes and perfected by European blacksmiths. Suddenly, a shod horse could travel farther, pull heavier loads, and stay battle-ready for years longer. The impact rippled across society. Farmers plowed harder soils, expanding arable land. Merchants' wagons rolled over rocky roads without delay. Even warfare changed as armored knights relied on sturdy mounts to carry their weight. The horseshoe's design was so effective that it remained virtually unchanged for centuries, only replaced when automobiles finally outpaced horsepower. Today, though we've swapped steeds for steel, that medieval ingenuity lingers in the phrase, "good luck." After all, what's a lucky horseshoe but a nod to an invention that kept the Middle Ages moving? From hooves to hands, our next invention didn't just change how we work, it redefined precision itself. The mechanical clock's smaller cousin, the spring-driven watch, brought timekeeping out of church towers and onto the wrist. Imagine the wonder of a 15th century merchant unboxing one of the first portable timepieces, a lavish, spring-powered clock small enough to sit on a table. Before this, time was a public affair measured by towering town clocks, but with the invention of the mainspring, time could be privatized, carried in pockets, or worn as pendants. Nuremberg craftsmen soon miniaturized these into Nuremberg eggs, ornate personal clocks that were the ancestors of today's watches. For the first time, individuals could structure their days independently, untethered from communal bells. This wasn't just about convenience, it was a power shift. Bankers could time loans, scientists could measure experiments, and punctuality became a personal virtue. The watch's evolution, from aristocratic toy to essential tool, mirrored the rise of the modern individual, accountable for their own hours. Today, whether you check a smartwatch or a vintage wristwind, you're tapping into a medieval innovation that made time personal. And speaking of personal revolutions, our next invention didn't just tell time, it helped spend it, quite literally, by revolutionizing money itself. Horseshoes may have kept medieval Europe moving, but another invention from the same fiery forges would eventually carry humanity much farther: the humble but mighty stirrup. Picture a knight in full armor attempting to mount his steed without one, heaving himself up with sheer strength while his chainmail clinks precariously. Now imagine the game-changing moment when a simple loop of iron or wood dangled from the saddle, offering a secure foothold. This wasn't just a convenience, it was a revolution in motion. Introduced to Europe around the 8th century, likely through contact with nomadic warriors, stirrups transformed horseback riding from a precarious balancing act into a stable, controlled art. The effects rippled far beyond the stables. With feet firmly anchored, riders could wield heavier weapons like lances without toppling, reshaping medieval warfare. Knights gained unprecedented stability in combat, leading to the rise of heavily armored cavalry that dominated battlefields for centuries. But stirrups didn't just empower warriors, they democratized travel. Farmers could now plow distant fields and return home without exhaustion. Messengers covered greater distances, and merchants transported goods more efficiently. The stirrup's genius lay in its simplicity, a small addition that multiplied a horse's and rider's potential. What's remarkable is how this medieval innovation echoes in modern life. The same principle of stability applies to bicycle pedals, motorcycle footrests, even the footholds on construction equipment. Every time you brace your feet on a subway, ride, or adjust your car's footwell, you're experiencing a descendant of that pivotal medieval idea. And while today's stirrups are crafted from lightweight alloys for equestrian sports, their fundamental design remains a testament to how one clever solution can gallop through the ages. Now let's shift gears from horseback to highways, where another medieval breakthrough still rolls beneath us: the concept of the treaded tire. Centuries before rubber met road, carts rumbling over muddy paths faced a familiar problem: wheels slipping uselessly in the muck. Resourceful wheelwrights responded by carving grooves into wooden rims, creating early treads that bit into soft earth. These patterned surfaces, much like today's tire treads, channeled mud away, improving traction. Fast forward to modern times, and the same logic keeps cars gripping rain-slicked roads, proof that medieval problem-solving still drives us forward. But the story doesn't end there. Those grooved wheels also inspired a subtler innovation: the idea of modular replacement. When a section of a wooden wheel wore out, craftsmen could replace just that segment instead of discarding the entire wheel. This approach to sustainable repair mirrors today's circular economy, where everything from shoe soles to smartphone batteries is designed for partial renewal. So the next time your car handles a sharp turn or you resole a favorite pair of boots, remember, you're benefiting from medieval minds who refused to let a little mud or wear slow them down. Speaking of traction, our next invention didn't just improve movement, it redefined how we harnessed nature's raw power. Hidden in the rafters of medieval mills, an ingenious system of gears and shafts unlocked the full potential of wind and water, setting the stage for the industrial age. But that's a tale for the next chapter. Hanging from the saddle of every medieval knight or messenger was an unassuming piece of metal that quietly reshaped the world: the stirrup. At first glance, it's just a curved bar to rest your feet, but its arrival in 8th century Europe was nothing short of revolutionary. Before stirrups, mounting a horse required agility and strength, especially in battle. Warriors had to haul themselves onto their steeds while wearing heavy armor, often needing assistance or a running start. But with this simple addition, riders gained something priceless: stability. Slip your foot into that iron loop, and suddenly you're not just clinging to the horse, you're part of it, anchored securely enough to wield a lance with devastating precision or ride for hours without exhaustion. The stirrup's impact on warfare was immediate and dramatic. Knights could now charge at full speed without fear of being thrown, transforming cavalry into the tanks of the Middle Ages. A well-aimed lance strike, powered by the full momentum of horse and rider, could shatter enemy lines, but the stirrup's influence stretched far beyond battlefields. Travel became more accessible. Merchants covered longer distances, farmers tended far-flung fields, and even postal systems relied on riders who could now endure grueling journeys. This wasn't just a tool, it was a catalyst for connection, shrinking the vast medieval world one hoofbeat at a time. What's fascinating is how this medieval innovation echoes in our daily lives. The same principle of balance and support appears in bicycle pedals, motorcycle footrests, and even the footholds on construction equipment. Modern horseback riding still uses stirrups nearly identical to those from 1,000 years ago, proving some designs are timeless. And next time you steady yourself on a crowded train by bracing your feet, remember, you're borrowing a trick from medieval riders who refused to let gravity slow them down. Now, let's turn from the stirrup's physical support to another medieval breakthrough that propped up something far more fragile: human health. Long before modern hospitals, monks in shadowy cloisters were pioneering a concept that would save countless lives: the quarantine. Long before social distancing entered our vocabulary, medieval Venice faced a crisis that demanded radical action. As the Black Death swept through Europe in the 14th century, the city's bustling ports became gateways for disaster. Infected ships docking daily, carrying both goods and invisible death. Desperate to slow the devastation, Venetian officials made a historic decision in 1348. All incoming vessels would anchor offshore for 40 days before unloading. They called it quarantina, from the Italian quarantagiorni, 40 days. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was a life-saving revelation. By isolating ships and their crews, the Venetians noticed something remarkable. When the waiting period passed without illness, the cargo could safely come ashore. The choice of 40 days wasn't random. Medieval physicians believed this span allowed bad air or miasma to dissipate, while the Bible's 40 days of purification lent spiritual weight to the practice. What began as a hunch became the world's first organized quarantine system, complete with lazaretto's special isolation hospitals built on remote islands. Venice's innovation spread across Europe, saving countless lives during later outbreaks. But the real breakthrough wasn't just the waiting period. It was the revolutionary idea that disease could be contained through systematic separation. Fast forward to today, and the echoes of medieval quarantine are everywhere, from airport health screenings to pandemic lockdowns. Modern science has replaced miasma theory with germ theory, but the core principle remains unchanged. Time and isolation break chains of infection. During the 2020 COVID pandemic, cities worldwide essentially replicated Venice's 14th century playbook, proving that sometimes the oldest solutions are the most enduring. Next time you hear quarantine, remember, you're invoking a medieval lifeline, born from desperation and preserved by necessity. Now, let's turn from life-saving measures to something that makes life flavorful: a medieval invention that transformed bland meals into feasts. The humble fork didn't just change how we eat, it sparked a dining revolution that reached every corner of the globe. Picture this: a lavish feast in 11th century Venice, where nobles delicately spear morsels of pasta with slender, two-pronged utensils while scandalized onlookers gasp. To modern eyes, this seems absurd. How could something as basic as a fork provoke outrage? Yet for centuries, most of Europe considered fingers, knives, and spoons the only civilized way to eat. The fork's journey from bizarre luxury to universal necessity is a tale of medieval innovation colliding with stubborn tradition. It all began in Byzantine courts, where golden forks were status symbols for the elite, tools so decadent that a Venetian princess was mocked for bringing one home in the year 1000. Clergy even condemned them as sinfully indulgent, arguing that God gave humans fingers for a reason. But Italians, faced with tangled strands of hot pasta and saucy dishes, saw practicality where others saw pretension. By the 1300s, wealthy Venetian households proudly displayed forks made of silver or bone, their slender tines perfect for twirling slippery noodles without staining silk sleeves. What started as a culinary workaround soon became a quiet revolution in dining hygiene. The fork's slow conquest of Europe reveals how deeply table manners reflect cultural values. The French resisted longest, with one 16th century traveler sneering that Italians used forks because they couldn't stand touching their food. But as global trade introduced complex dishes with sauces and small ingredients, the fork's utility became undeniable. By the 1700s, it had shed its scandalous reputation, evolving into the four-tined design we recognize today, a perfect balance between spearing and scooping. Now, consider how this unassuming utensil reshaped society beyond the dining table. Forks demanded new tableware plates with raised edges to prevent spills, alongside specialized knives with rounded tips, since dinkers no longer needed dagger-sharp blades for eating. They even influenced language. The Italian word for fork, forchetta, comes from furca, meaning pitchfork, a nod to its agricultural roots. Today, from sushi bars to salad forks, this medieval invention remains a testament to how practicality eventually triumphs over prejudice. And speaking of tools that transformed humble tasks, our next invention didn't just change how we eat, it revolutionized how we grow our food. Hidden in medieval gardens was a simple device that turned back-breaking labor into manageable work, the wheelbarrow's gardening cousin, the humble spade. But that's a story rooted in soil and sweat. Buried in the soil of medieval China lies an invention so practical that it quietly fueled population booms across continents, the seed drill. Picture a farmer in the 11th century, bent double as he scatters handfuls of grain across a field, knowing half will be blown away by wind or eaten by birds before taking root. Now imagine the revolutionary simplicity of a wooden-wheeled cart with hollow tubes that dropped seeds one by one into perfectly spaced furrows. This wasn't just efficiency, it was agricultural alchemy. Chinese innovators like Jia Sixi documented these seed plows as early as the 6th century, but it was European adaptations centuries later that turned the concept into a yield-boosting powerhouse. The genius lay in precision. Unlike broadcast sowing, where seeds clumped or scattered wastefully, drill planting ensured each kernel had room to grow without competing for sunlight or nutrients. Medieval English versions, like those described in Walter of Henley's 13th century farming manuals, used gravity-fed channels to space seeds evenly, tripling harvests in some regions. Suddenly, fields produced more grain with less labor, freeing up hands for other trades and stabilizing food supplies during harsh winters. Fast forward to today, and the same principle drives modern planters, where GPS-guided drills place seeds with millimeter accuracy. But the seed drill's legacy isn't just about abundance, it reshaped civilization's relationship with the land. Reliable harvests meant villages could grow into towns, and towns into cities without fear of famine. It's no exaggeration to say this medieval tool helped sow the seeds of urbanization. Now, let's shift from fertile fields to uncharted waters. where another medieval innovation was steering explorers toward the horizon. The magnetic compass didn't just guide ships, it redefined humanity's sense of direction, turning treacherous seas into highways of discovery. Imagine standing on the deck of a medieval ship as it ventures beyond sight of land. The coastline vanished into haze while waves stretch endlessly in every direction. Without landmarks or stars visible in stormy skies, how could sailors possibly know which way to steer? The answer lay in a small, unassuming device that would rewrite the map of the world: the magnetic compass. While Chinese inventors had experimented with lodestone's mysterious properties for centuries, it was medieval European navigators who transformed this curiosity into a lifeline for global exploration. By suspending a magnetized needle above a wind-rose card, sailors could suddenly find north even in fog or darkness, turning guesswork into precision. The impact was staggering. Before compasses, voyages relied on risky latitude sailing, sticking to known routes parallel to shorelines. With this new tool, ships like those of Portuguese explorer Henry the Navigator could strike boldly across open ocean, trusting the needle's steady pull. Trade routes expanded from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, linking continents in ways previously unimaginable. Columbus's 1492 journey, Da Gama's path to India, even Magellan's circumnavigation, all hinged on this medieval innovation. The compass didn't just guide ships, it dissolved boundaries, proving the world was far larger and more connected than anyone had dared to dream. What's remarkable is how little the core technology has changed. Modern smartphones still use magnetometers, digital descendants of that medieval needle, while GPS satellites effectively create a celestial compass for the space age. Yet the real legacy isn't just in navigation, it's in the courage to venture beyond the known. Every time your map app recalculates a route, you're benefiting from a 700-year-old breakthrough that taught humanity to trust invisible forces, and in doing so discovered unseen horizons. Now let's shift from guiding ships to preserving something far more perishable. Hidden in medieval cellars was an ingenious solution to a problem that still plagues picnics and pantries today: how to keep things cool without modern appliances. The answer lies in a clever twist on nature's own refrigeration: the ice house. Beneath the dim light of a medieval cooper's workshop, the rhythmic tapping of hammers on wooden staves wasn't just crafting containers, it was engineering a revolution in preservation. The humble wooden barrel, perfected by 13th century European craftsmen, became the unsung hero of trade, travel, and even taste. Picture a world without refrigeration, where food spoiled within days and liquids like wine turned to vinegar by the next full moon. Then came the barrel's genius design: curved staves held tight by iron hoops, swelling when wet to create an airtight seal. This wasn't just storage, it was time travel for perishables. Wine could age for years, developing complex flavors instead of souring. Salted fish or pickled vegetables stayed edible through harsh winters. Even water, often unsafe to drink, could be transported without contamination. The barrel's influence stretched far beyond practicality. It shaped economies. Standardized sizes allowed merchants to calculate taxes and tariffs by the ton, a unit that gave us the modern ton. Explorers like Columbus stocked ships with barrels of water and salted beef, enabling voyages that reshaped the globe. But perhaps its most enduring legacy is in flavor. Today's whiskey distillers still age their spirits in charred oak barrels, a technique borrowed from medieval winemakers who noticed wood imparted depth and character. That smoky vanilla note in your bourbon, it's the ghost of a medieval cooper's experiment. Now let's turn from preserving liquids to illuminating darkness. While barrels kept medieval cellars stocked, Another invention was lighting up homes, streets, and even battlefields. Candles made from beeswax, a luxury that outshone smoky tallow and revolutionized nighttime productivity. In a world where sunset meant near total darkness for most, the medieval shift from flickering tallow candles to clean burning beeswax was like swapping a campfire for a light bulb. Early candles made from animal fat sputtered with foul smoke and dripped grease onto fine tapestries. But monastic beekeepers harvesting wax from their hives discovered something extraordinary. When purified and woven into wicks, beeswax burned brighter, longer, and without the stench. Suddenly, scribes could work late into the night copying manuscripts. Merchants tallied ledgers after dusk, and midnight masses glowed with a celestial warmth. The impact was both practical and symbolic. Beeswax candles became a status symbol. Churches burned them to honor saints. Nobles displayed them as wealth, and their steady light allowed artisans to craft intricate details on everything from armor to altarpieces. Today, while electric lights have replaced wax, the legacy lingers. Modern candle making still follows medieval techniques for premium brands, and the phrase, "burning the midnight wax," nods to this quiet revolution. From barrel-aged whiskey to beeswax's golden glow, medieval ingenuity still shapes how we savor and see the world. Now, let's step from the warm glow of candles into a medieval innovation that turned chaos into order, the filing system that quietly organized the foundations of modern bureaucracy. While much of medieval Europe plunged into darkness after sunset, one city burned brighter than the rest. 10th century Cordoba, where the glow of hundreds of oil lamps transformed night into a time of bustling activity. Imagine walking through its paved streets under the flickering light of these early street lamps, their wicks fueled by olive oil in protective glass enclosures. This wasn't just illumination, it was a radical rethinking of urban life. Under Caliph al-Hakam II's rule, Cordoba became the first city in Europe to implement organized public lighting, a system so advanced that visiting diplomats from unlit northern kingdoms wrote home in astonishment. The effects rippled far beyond safety. Lit streets meant extended market hours where spice merchants and bookbinders could conduct business long after dusk. Scholars traveled between libraries and mosques without fear of stumbling into shadowed alleys, while communal gatherings spilled into moonlit plazas with newfound vibrancy. This marriage of technology and civic planning revealed something profound. Light wasn't just functional, it was social glue. The same principle powers modern cities, where LED streetlights now cast their cool glow over midnight food trucks and late-night strolls. What medieval Cordoba understood, and what we've inherited, is that lighting shapes culture as much as it dispels darkness. Today's smart streetlights, which dim during quiet hours and brighten for emergencies, are direct descendants of those 10th century oil lamps. They share the same goal, not just visibility, but the creation of spaces where life can flourish around the clock. And while the technology has leaped from whale oil to tungsten to LEDs, the human desire to push back the night remains unchanged. Now let's turn from luminous streets to something that sweetened medieval lives in the shadows, an invention that turned bitter herbs into irresistible treats. Hidden in monastery gardens was the precursor to every candy bar and dessert you love today, sugar refinement. In the bustling markets of medieval Damascus, crusaders returning from the Holy Land carried back something far sweeter than victory: thick, fibrous stalks of sugarcane. At first, Europeans didn't know what to make of this exotic plant, but when Arab traders demonstrated how to crush and boil its juice into crystalline sweetness, it sparked a culinary revolution. Picture a 12th century Sicilian monastery, where monks laboriously turned wooden presses to extract sugarcane's precious nectar, then simmered it in copper cauldrons until golden crystals formed. This wasn't just a new flavor. It was alchemy, transforming bitter herbs and sour fruits into delights that could make even the humblest peasant's bread taste like a noble's dessert. The real breakthrough came with the vertical 3-roller mill, an innovation borrowed from olive presses. By crushing cane between rotating cylinders, medieval engineers maximized juice extraction, turning what was once a luxury for kings into something townsfolk could afford in tiny cones wrapped in parchment. Venice became the sugar capital of Europe, its warehouses stacked with white gold destined for apothecaries' shelves and royal feasts, but the impact went far beyond the palate. Sugar's demand fueled some of history's first global supply chains, with plantations stretching from Cyprus to the Canary Islands, a bittersweet foreshadowing of the colonial economies to come. Yet sugar's legacy isn't just about taste or trade. It reshaped medicine as medieval doctors prescribed it to mask the bitterness of herbal remedies, and it even influenced art painters used sugar syrup as a binder for vibrant pigments. Today, when you stir a cube into your coffee or bake a batch of cookies, you're participating in a tradition that began in those smoky medieval kitchens, where curiosity turned a strange reed into a substance that would sweeten the world. Now, let's turn from the warmth of the kitchen to something that literally kept medieval homes from freezing, an innovation hidden in the very walls. The fireplace as we know it didn't just chase away the cold, it redefined how entire societies lived, cooked, and gathered. Picture waking up in a medieval home on a freezing winter morning, not to the scent of breakfast cooking over an open hearth, but to the acrid sting of smoke filling every corner of the room. Before the chimney's invention, that was daily reality. Fires burned in pits or central hearths, their smoke lazily curling upward to escape through a hole in the roof if it didn't suffocate the family first. Then came a breakthrough as simple as it was life-changing: the chimney. By the 12th century, builders began embedding fireplaces into walls with narrow flues that funneled smoke outside, turning hazardous living spaces into havens of warmth and safety. This wasn't just architectural tweaking, it was a domestic revolution. Suddenly, homes could stay heated without sacrificing breathable air. Stone or brick chimneys drew smoke upward like a straw, while hearths radiated heat more efficiently into rooms. The wealthy adorned their mantels with carvings, turning functional structures into status symbols, but even peasant cottages benefited from smaller versions. The health impact was profound. Chronic respiratory ailments from constant smoke exposure declined, and interiors stayed cleaner without layers of soot coating every surface. But the chimney's legacy goes beyond comfort. Its design principles underpin modern heating systems, from wood stoves to central HVAC that vent above your gas fireplace. It's a direct descendant of medieval flues. Even the concept of zoning heating specific rooms rather than entire dwellings traces back to this innovation. Next time you cozy up by a fire, remember, those flickering flames are safe to enjoy because medieval masons decided smoke belonged outside, not in your lungs. Now let's turn from warming homes to prepping meals with a tool so essential. It's likely in your kitchen drawer right now. The medieval kitchen wasn't just about cauldrons and spits. It gave us an invention that slices through history as cleanly as it dices onions, the chef's knife. In the smoky workshops of medieval blacksmiths, amid the clang of hammers shaping swords and plowshares, a quieter revolution was taking place, one that would forever change how we prepare our meals. The kitchen knife, as we know it today, emerged from these forges as a specialized tool unlike anything that came before. Prior to this, most households relied on a single, all-purpose blade, crude and unwieldy for delicate tasks like peeling vegetables or deboning fish. But by the 13th century, blacksmiths began crafting knives with narrower, sharper blades perfectly balanced for culinary precision. These weren't just smaller versions of hunting knives. They were purpose-built for the cook's hand, with ergonomic handles carved from hardwoods and blades tapered to glide through food with effortless control. The difference was night and day. Where a multi-purpose blade might crush herbs or tear meat, these new kitchen knives sliced cleanly, preserving textures and flavors. Manuscripts from the period show cooks using them to julienne root vegetables for stews, thinly carve roasted meats for feasts, and even create elaborate food sculptures for noble banquets. The design was so effective that it became standardized across Europe, wide at the heel for rocking cuts, tapering to a fine point for intricate work. Fast forward to today, and the best chef's knives still follow this medieval blueprint. Whether it's a Japanese santoku or a German-made classic, the DNA of those early forged blades lives on in every precision mince and chiffonade. What's truly remarkable is how this innovation democratized cooking. No longer was fine knife work reserved for royal kitchens with armies of servants. A peasant's wife could now fillet a fish as skillfully as a castle's master cook, given the right tool. The kitchen knife didn't just make food preparation easier, it elevated everyday meals into something closer to art. And speaking of safeguarding value, our next invention didn't just transform kitchens, it secured fortunes. Hidden in the vaults of medieval merchants was a revolutionary system for protecting wealth, one that would evolve into the modern bank. In the bustling marketplaces of medieval Florence and Venice, where silk merchants haggled over bolts of fabric and spice traders weighed exotic imports, another kind of exchange was quietly revolutionizing the world, one that had nothing to do with goods and everything to do with trust. Picture a goldsmith's dimly lit workshop, where heavy chests lined the walls, each filled with coins deposited by merchants wary of carrying their wealth on dangerous roads. These craftsmen, skilled in assessing precious metals, began issuing handwritten receipts for deposits, slips of paper that could be traded like currency itself. What started as a convenience soon became the foundation of modern banking. The real breakthrough came with the bill of exchange, a medieval version of today's checks. A merchant in Venice could deposit gold with a banker, receive a written promise of payment, and present it to a colleague in Paris. No risky travel with bulging coin purses required. Italian families like the Medici turned this system into an empire, establishing branches across Europe where agents settled debts through ledger entries rather than physical coins. This wasn't just safer, it accelerated trade by freeing capital from the constraints of geography. Suddenly, a merchant's wealth wasn't limited to what he could carry. It existed as numbers on paper, moving faster than any ship or caravan. But medieval bankers didn't stop there. They pioneered concepts like interest, originally disguised as penalties to skirt church usury laws, fractional reserve lending, loaning out portions of deposits while keeping reserves, and even early forms of insurance for risky sea voyages. The vaulted ceilings of Florence's oldest banks still whisper of these innovations, where scribes hunched over ledgers that balanced debits and credits with meticulous precision, a system so effective it became the blueprint for global finance. Fast forward to today, and the echoes of medieval banking are everywhere. Your digital bank balance, the mortgage on your home, even the stock market's complex trades, all trace back to those candlelit counting tables where goldsmiths became the world's first financial architects. Next time you tap your phone to pay for coffee, remember, you're participating in a system forged 7 centuries ago, when trust became more valuable than gold. Now let's turn from safeguarding wealth to preserving something far more perishable, your morning coffee's warmth. the medieval solution to keeping drinks hot wasn't just practical, it was downright cozy. Long before stainless steel thermoses lined store shelves, medieval travelers had already cracked the code to keeping drinks hot or cold for hours. Picture a 14th century merchant trekking across the Alps, his wooden satchel holding a curious vessel, two clay pots nested inside each other with a layer of wool or straw packed between them. This simple yet brilliant design trapped air, nature's best insulator, creating a buffer against the icy mountain winds or scorching desert sun. Whether it was a monk carrying warm broth to the sick or a soldier preserving precious water on campaign, these double-walled containers were the ancestors of today's vacuum-sealed travel mugs. The science behind them was surprisingly sophisticated. By minimizing heat transfer through conduction, preventing the inner wall from touching the outer, one medieval craftsman achieved what modern physics would later explain as thermal isolation. Some versions even featured wax seals to lock in temperature, while others used hollowed-out animal bladders as lightweight liners. The effectiveness was undeniable. Historical accounts describe hot tea staying warm for an entire day in Mongolian versions made of felt and metal, or sherbet remaining chilled in Persian yakchuls during summer caravans. What's remarkable is how this medieval hack evolved without a shred of modern material science. From the insulated flasks carried by crusaders to the ornate bota bags of Spanish shepherds lined with goat hair, the core principle remained unchanged: create dead air space and temperature lingers. Fast forward to the 1800s, when Scottish scientist James Dewar borrowed this very concept to invent the vacuum flask, and suddenly the medieval traveler's trick became a laboratory staple. Today, whether you're sipping iced coffee on a hike or keeping soup warm at a winter picnic, you're benefiting from an insulation breakthrough that's literally centuries in the making. Now let's turn from preserving temperature to preserving order. Hidden in the cluttered scriptoriums of medieval monasteries was an organizational tool so effective, it still structures our workspaces today: the humble filing cabinet's ancestor, the pigeonhole desk. Imagine a Benedictine monk in the 12th century, surrounded by piles of parchment, homilies to copy, letters to answer, ledgers to update. Without a system, this sea of documents would drown productivity. The solution: a wooden desk with stacked compartments, each slot assigned to a specific task or correspondent. These early pigeonholes, named for their resemblance to bird nesting boxes, allowed scribes to sort works in progress vertically instead of spreading them across tables. Need to revisit St. Augustine's writings? Reach for the third hole on the left. Awaiting a reply from the abbey in Cluny, tuck it into the top right slot until the messenger arrives. This wasn't just tidiness, it was cognitive liberation. By externalizing memory onto physical space, monks could focus on one task without mental clutter. The design spread to merchants' counting houses, where invoices and contracts found dedicated homes, and even to royal chanceries, where state documents were organized by urgency or topic. Modern offices still rely on this medieval logic, from the cubicle's inbox trays to email folders labeled "follow up." Even the phrase "put it in the right pigeonhole" endures as shorthand for efficient sorting. But the real genius lay in adaptability. Unlike fixed shelves, pigeonholes could be rearranged or expanded as needs changed, a medieval version of customizable workspace. Today's apps for digital task management, with their drag and drop columns and color-coded tags, are spiritual successors to those wooden grids. So the next time you file a receipt or clear your desktop icons, thank those medieval monks who proved that order isn't about having less, it's about knowing exactly where everything belonged. Tucked away in the shadowy corners of medieval monasteries, amid the scent of ink and parchment, sat the unsung hero of bureaucracy, the document chest. These weren't just storage boxes, they were the birthplaces of modern organization. Picture a 13th century scribe, his fingers stained with ink, carefully rolling up a finished manuscript and slotting it into a wooden chest divided by labeled compartments. One section for land deeds, another for royal correspondence, a third for liturgical texts. Each scroll or codex had its designated place. This simple act of sorting wasn't just about tidiness, it was a revolution in information management. For the first time, knowledge could be retrieved as easily as it was stored without frantic digging through piles. The system's genius lay in its adaptability. Some chests had removable dividers, allowing monks to reconfigure space as their archives grew. Others featured lockable lids, safeguarding sensitive documents from prying eyes, a medieval version of password protection. By the Renaissance, merchants adopted the method, using similar chests to organize invoices, contracts, and shipping manifests. The Medici family's famed banking empire relied on this very logic, their fortunes literally hinging on the ability to locate a single loan agreement among thousands. Fast forward to today, and the echoes of those medieval chests are everywhere. The filing cabinets in your office, the color-coded binders on your shelf, even the nested folders on your computer desktop, they all follow the same foundational principle. Information is only as valuable as your ability to find it. Modern systems may have swapped oak for steel or pixels, but the core idea remains unchanged. Even cloud storage, with its virtual folders, owes a debt to those ink-stained monks who proved that chaos could be tamed with nothing more than a label and a plan. Now let's shift from organizing papers to energizing bodies, because our next medieval invention didn't just tidy up offices, it powered the workouts that keep us strong. Hidden in the training yards of knights and soldiers was a simple tool that turned brute strength into disciplined muscle, the kettlebell's ancient ancestor, the cannonball grip. Beneath the echoing stone walls of medieval English prisons, a peculiar sight would have greeted visitors, rows of men trudging endlessly on massive wooden wheels, their steps powering the grinding of grain for the local mill. These treadwheels, known as treading mills, were less about punishment and more about practicality, a way to convert human effort into useful labor. Prisoners climbed like hamsters in a wheel, their collective motion turning gears that crushed grain beneath heavy millstones. It was grueling work, but it kept communities fed and prisoners occupied. Fast forward to the 19th century, when engineers saw potential in this grim contraption. By the 1850s, treadmills had been reborn as exercise machines in British prisons, touted as tools for moral reform through physical exertion. The real twist came when fitness enthusiasts stripped away the punitive associations and recognized the treadmill's genius, a compact way to walk or run indoors, regardless of weather. Early 20th century models, like the motorized treadmill bicycle, patented in 1912, catered to athletes and health fanatics. But it wasn't until the jogging craze of the 1970s that treadmills exploded into home gyms and fitness centers worldwide. Today's high-tech versions with touchscreens and virtual trails are a far cry from those creaky prison wheels, but the core idea remains unchanged. Human motion harnessed for purpose. What's fascinating is how this medieval invention solved a modern problem before it even existed. In an age of sedentary lifestyles, the treadmill offers what those prisoners accidentally perfected: a way to transform idle energy into vitality. The next time you adjust the incline on your gym's machine, remember, you're stepping into a history that began with grain, not gains. Now, let's turn from grueling workouts to something that brightened even the drabbest medieval interiors, an innovation that still adds warmth and charm to homes today: the stained glass window. Imagine sunlight filtering through a 13th century cathedral, casting pools of ruby, sapphire, and emerald across cold stone floors. Stained glass wasn't just decoration, it was storytelling in light and color. Medieval artisans mixed metallic oxides into molten glass, cobalt for blue, gold for crimson, then pieced together these vibrant shards like a divine jigsaw puzzle. The result, windows that transformed sunlight into sermons, illustrating Bible tales for illiterate congregations. But beyond their beauty, these panes were feats of engineering. Lead strips, called cames, held the glass in intricate patterns, while iron armatures supported towering designs against wind and weather. The craft's legacy stretches far beyond churches. Victorian homes revived stained glass as a status symbol, with floral transoms and geometric hall lights. Today, artists blend medieval techniques with modern tools, creating everything from abstract panels to corporate logos. Even the prismatic glow of your smartphone screen owes a subtle debt to those medieval glaziers who first taught light to dance in color. What began as a way to inspire faith became a timeless art form, proof that even the most functional medieval inventions could also lift the spirit. And speaking of lifting, our next innovation didn't just elevate moods, it hoisted entire cities skyward, one stone at a time. High above the stone floors of medieval cathedrals, sunlight didn't just shine through windows, it transformed into something magical. Stained glass wasn't merely decoration, it was alchemy, turning ordinary daylight into radiant stories that could make even the most hardened peasant pause in awe. Picture a 12th century artisan carefully blending crushed metals into molten glass, cobalt for deep blues, gold for ruby reds, then shaping these vibrant sheets into intricate panels. Each piece was a puzzle fragment, held together by slender strips of lead called cames, forming scenes so vivid they could teach scripture to those who couldn't read a single word. The brilliance of medieval stained glass lay in its dual purpose. Beyond its breathtaking beauty, it served as a kind of illuminated manuscript for the masses. A single window might depict the martyrdom of a saint or the triumph of good over evil, casting colored light that shifted with the sun's movement, making the stories feel alive. Chartres Cathedral in France still boasts over 150 of these masterpieces, their blues so intense that chemists have struggled to replicate the exact shade. But this wasn't just art for art's sake. The windows also functioned as insulation, trapping heat during chilly winters while filtering harsh sunlight into a soft, ethereal glow. What's truly astonishing is how little the craft has changed. Modern glass artists still use many of the same techniques, cutting glass with heated irons, painting details with metallic oxides, and soldering lead cames, proving that medieval artisans perfected a process too elegant to improve upon. Today, you'll find their legacy not just in churches but in subway stations, corporate lobbies, and even trendy home decor. Those geometric stained glass lamps in your favorite cafe. They're direct descendants of cathedral windows repurposed for a secular age. Now, let's shift from the sublime to the effervescent. While medieval artisans were busy turning sunlight into stories, others were experimenting with a far more playful invention, one that would eventually put bubbles in your soda and fizz in your champagne. The origins of carbonation might seem modern, but they bubble up from a much earlier time. In the chilly cellars of medieval monasteries, monks nursing barrels of beer noticed something peculiar. When fermentation happened just right, the liquid sparkled with tiny, lively bubbles, a phenomenon they called the devil's breath for its mysterious, almost magical quality. At first, they considered it a flaw, but adventurous brewers soon realized these fizzy brews had a delightful tickle on the tongue. By the 13th century, certain Belgian ales were prized for their natural carbonation, achieved through secondary fermentation in tightly sealed casks. This accidental discovery laid the groundwork for everything from sparkling mead to the champagne perfected centuries later by Dom Pérignon. The real breakthrough came with the invention of the beer stone, a porous limestone rod medieval brewers used to agitate fermenting liquids, encouraging bubble formation. It was a crude method compared to today's precision carbonation tanks, but the principle was the same. Trap those elusive bubbles, fast forward to your favorite soda or mineral water, and you're tasting the legacy of monks who turned a brewing quirk into a global obsession. What's fascinating is how medieval ingenuity anticipated modern cravings. That satisfying hiss when you pop a soda can. It's the sound of a 700-year-old experiment still fizzing with life. And while today's carbonation is factory perfect, there's something poetic about knowing the first bubbles were born in shadowy vaults, where monks unknowingly bottled a little bit of magic. Deep in the vaulted cellars of medieval monasteries, where barrels of ale and mead rested in cool darkness, an accidental discovery was bubbling to life, one that would eventually sparkle in every soda can and champagne flute today. Monks tending their fermenting brews noticed something peculiar: tiny, effervescent bubbles rising in certain batches, creating a lively tingle on the tongue. At first, they called it the devil's breath, a mysterious force that made drinks unusually spirited. But adventurous brewers soon realized this wasn't a flaw, it was a revelation. By carefully controlling fermentation temperatures and sealing casks tightly, they could trap those elusive bubbles, creating early versions of what we'd now call carbonated drinks. The real breakthrough came with the beer stone, a porous limestone rod medieval brewers would plunge into fermenting liquids. As the stone reacted with acids in the brew, it released carbon dioxide, intensifying the fizz. This crude method was light years away from modern carbonation tanks, but the principle was the same: harness nature's chemistry to create something delightfully effervescent. Fast forward to the 17th century, and this monk-tested technique evolved into sparkling meads and eventually Dom Pérignon's champagne. What began as a curious quirk in medieval cellars became the foundation for an entire category of drinks, proof that even the smallest bubbles can make a big splash in history. Now let's shift from what fills your glass to what fills your free time. Hidden in the workshops of medieval craftsmen was a tool that would shape not just wood or metal, but the very way we play. The humble paintbrush, refined by medieval artists, didn't just create masterpieces, it unlocked creativity as a pastime for generations to come. Picture a 15th century illuminator in a sunlit scriptorium, carefully layering gold leaf onto a manuscript with a brush made from squirrel tail hairs. Before this era, brushes were crude tools, often just frayed twigs or bundled reeds, but medieval artisans perfected them, selecting animal hairs for specific textures and binding them with precision. A sable brush for delicate details, hog bristles for bold strokes, each became an extension of the artist's hand. This wasn't just about professionalism, it democratized art. Suddenly, a merchant's daughter could practice calligraphy, a squire could sketch landscapes, and even children could dabble with pigments. The brush's legacy stretches far beyond medieval ateliers. Today, whether you're watercoloring as a hobby, touching up a model airplane, or even applying makeup, you're wielding a tool whose design was refined by those patient, pigment-stained hands. In a world that often values utility over joy, the paintbrush reminds us that medieval ingenuity didn't just build cathedrals, it crafted the tools that make life beautiful. While knights jousted in Europe and monks copied manuscripts by candlelight, medieval Chinese anglers were quietly perfecting a tool that would revolutionize their craft, the fishing reel. Picture a quiet riverbank in 12th century China, where a fisherman unspools his line with a simple wooden device that allows him to cast beyond the shallows with unprecedented precision. Unlike earlier methods that relied on hand-throwing lines or stationary traps, this ingenious reel stored excess line on a rotating spool, letting anglers reach deeper waters where larger fish lurk. The design was beautifully simple, a hand-cranked wheel mounted on a rod often crafted from bamboo for lightness and durability. But its impact was profound suddenly. Fishing wasn't just about luck or patience, it became a skill of strategy and finesse. What made this invention so enduring was its adaptability. By the Ming Dynasty, reels had evolved to include gears for smoother retrieval, and some even featured rudimentary drag systems to prevent lines from snapping under the weight of a thrashing catch. These innovations weren't just practical, they transformed fishing from subsistence to sport. Wealthy nobles commissioned ornate reels inlaid with ivory or jade, while peasant fishermen relied on sturdier versions to feed their families. The reel's journey westward was slow but inevitable. By the 17th century. English anglers were adapting the design for trout streams, and today's high-tech reels, with their precision bearings and carbon fiber frames, are direct descendants of those medieval Chinese prototypes. The reel's legacy isn't just about catching fish. It symbolizes humanity's knack for refining simple tools into instruments of mastery. Every time a modern angler feels the tug of a bass on the line or adjusts the drag to tire out a marlin, they're participating in a tradition that began with a wooden spool and a clever idea. And speaking of clever ideas, our next invention didn't just extend a line into water. It drew boundaries around our most private spaces, reshaping how we think about security and solitude. Tucked away in the bustling markets of medieval Venice, where merchants haggled over silks and spices, another kind of trade was flourishing, one that dealt in secrets rather than goods. The need to protect private correspondence from prying eyes led to an invention as delicate as it was effective: the wax seal. Picture a noblewoman in 14th century Florence pressing her signet ring into molten wax to secure a letter to her husband away at war. The hardened imprint bearing her family's crest was more than decoration. It was a tamper-proof lock. If the wax was cracked upon arrival, the recipient would know the message had been intercepted. This wasn't just about privacy, it was about trust in an age without digital encryption. Seals became so vital that forgery was punishable by death in some kingdoms, and papal bulls' official decrees from the Pope derived their name from the lead seal bulla that authenticated them. The symbolism was powerful. An intact seal meant the contents were as untouched as the moment they were penned. Today, though we've swapped wax for passwords and biometric scans, the principle remains unchanged. That little padlock icon in your web browser, it's the spiritual heir to the medieval seal, a silent promise that your secrets stay yours. From fishing lines to sealed letters, these inventions remind us that the medieval world wasn't just surviving, it was solving problems with a creativity that still resonates in our daily lives. Tucked inside the velvet-lined coffers of medieval nobility lay a tool more powerful than a sword: the wax seal. Far from mere decoration, these intricate impressions pressed into molten wax were the birth certificates, contracts, and encrypted emails of their time. Picture a 14th century duke hunched over parchment, his signet ring hovering above a flickering candle. As the wax pooled onto the document, that single press of his family crest transformed ordinary correspondence into an unforgeable promise. Broken wax meant tampering, and tampering could mean war. The genius of seals wasn't just in their security, it was in their universality. Illiterate peasants recognized noble crests as easily as scholars did. Papal bulls' official decrees from the Pope derived their name from the lead bully seals that dangled like medieval security tags. Even King Edward I of England used seals so elaborate they depicted him enthroned in full regalia, a visual resume of power. But this system had vulnerabilities. Ambitious forgers would steal seals from melted wax or carve counterfeit rings, leading to gruesome punishments like the French law that condemned seal fakers to have their hands amputated. Today's digital signatures and biometric scans serve the same purpose, verifying authenticity in a world teeming with deception, that little padlock icon in your browser. It's the spiritual heir to the wax seal, a silent guardian of trust. Even cryptocurrency wallets rely on cryptographic seals to secure transactions, proof that medieval minds cracked a code we're still using. Now, let's shift from securing documents to securing something far more exhilarating: your weekend thrills. Hidden in the dusty notebooks of medieval engineers lies the origin story of every roller coaster drop and zip line rush you've ever felt. The trebuchet wasn't just a siege weapon, it was the world's first adrenaline machine. Imagine the terror and awe of watching a 20-ton trebuchet hurl a boulder across a battlefield, a deadly arc of physics and fury. But medieval engineers quickly realized these monstrous machines had an unexpected side effect: the thrill of controlled peril. By the 15th century, smaller versions were repurposed for entertainment at fairs, flinging volunteers strapped into reinforced baskets in breathtaking parabolic flights. These human trebuchets became the medieval equivalent of extreme sports, drawing crowds willing to pay for the stomach-dropping rush of temporary flight. The physics behind these contraptions laid the groundwork for modern amusement rides. That weightless moment at the top of a roller coaster loop. It's the same principle that sent medieval daredevils soaring potential energy, transforming into kinetic euphoria. Even bungee jumping traces its roots to Venetian bridge leapers testing ropes made of braided silk. What began as warfare's grim engineering became the blueprint for joy, proving that even humanity's darkest tools can be reinvented for delight. So next time you buckle into a theme park ride, remember, you're not just chasing thrills, you're stepping into a tradition of medieval mavericks who turned terror into triumph, one gravity-defying launch at a time. Long before holograms and biometric chips, the concept of proving your identity across borders began with a simple piece of parchment tucked into the belts of medieval pilgrims. Picture a weary traveler in the 12th century, clutching a creased letter stamped with a bishop's seal as they approached a fortified city gate. This safe conduct document wasn't just bureaucratic paperwork, it was a lifeline. Issued by religious authorities or local rulers, these early passports guaranteed safe passage through war-torn territories or rival kingdoms, promising protection under penalty of excommunication or royal wrath. A pilgrim bound for Jerusalem might carry one bearing the Pope's insignia, while a merchant crossing the Alps would secure one from their hometown guild. These documents didn't just list names, they described physical features: a scar here, a distinctive beard there, making them the first attempt to link identity to paper. The system emerged from necessity, with Europe's roads teeming with bandits and borders shifting after every battle. Travelers needed proof they weren't spies or deserters. Some safe conducts even functioned as medieval visas, specifying which routes could be taken or which inns were sanctioned for lodging. The famed Canterbury Tales pilgrims likely carried such papers, their inked seals smoothing the way to sacred sites. But these documents held darker power too. During the Crusades, they doubled as early exit permits, ensuring only approved citizens could leave a kingdom's labor force. Fast forward to today, and the DNA of those medieval letters lives on in every navy blue passport. The photo-paged personal details, a digital evolution of those handwritten descriptions. The intricate watermark patterns, direct descendants of wax seals meant to deter forgery. Even the concept of diplomatic immunity traces back to medieval heralds, whose safe conducts ensured they wouldn't be slaughtered as messengers. What began as a way to protect the pious has become the invisible scaffolding of global mobility, proof that while borders may harden or soften, humanity's need to move, trade, and explore remains timeless. And now for our final medieval marvel, an invention so fundamental, it's easy to overlook its revolutionary roots. The next time you glance in the mirror, remember, the reflective glass staring back at you is a direct descendant of a breakthrough that changed how humans see themselves, both literally and philosophically. In the bustling streets of 12th century Bologna, a quiet revolution was taking shape, one that would redefine how knowledge was shared, challenged, and preserved for centuries. Picture this: clusters of students gathering around charismatic teachers in open-air courtyards, debating Roman law and Aristotelian philosophy, not in isolated monastic cells but in vibrant communal spaces. These informal gatherings soon crystallized into something unprecedented: the university. Unlike the scattered schools of antiquity, medieval universities like Bologna and Paris became self-governing corporations of scholars, complete with structured curricula, formal degrees, and even the right to strike if their privileges were violated. The very word university comes from the Latin universitas, meaning a guild, because that's exactly what they were: guilds of knowledge where masters trained apprentices in the art of thinking. The genius of the medieval university lay in its systems. At Paris, the trivium grammar, rhetoric, logic, and quadrivium arithmetic, geometry, music, astronomy formed the foundation of the liberal arts, a framework so enduring that it still echoes in modern general education requirements. Lectures weren't passive affairs. Students engaged in rigorous disputations, formal debates where every thesis had to withstand withering critique. And then there were the degrees themselves: baccalaureate, master, doctorate titles that originated as medieval trade certifications, proving a scholar's mastery just as a blacksmith's guild tested a journeyman's skill. But perhaps the most revolutionary idea was universality. A degree from Bologna or Oxford carried weight across Christendom, creating a transnational class of educated professionals. Lawyers trained in Roman civil law could practice from London to Naples, while theologians like Thomas Aquinas synthesized ideas from Arabic commentators and Greek texts translated in Toledo's multicultural libraries. This wasn't just education, it was the birth of the intellectual commons, where knowledge transcended borders. Fast forward to today, and the medieval university's DNA is everywhere. That cap and gown you see at graduations, direct descendants of medieval academic dress, designed to keep scholars warm in unheated lecture halls, the dissertation defense. A ritualized version of those old public disputations. Even the modern concept of academic freedom traces back to charters like the University of Heidelberg's in 1386, which guaranteed scholars protection from political interference. What began as a loose collection of lecture halls and student hostels became the engine of human progress, nurturing everything from Newton's physics to Marie Curie's chemistry. So the next time you walk past a university's ivy-covered walls, remember, those corridors echo with 7 centuries of questions, arguments, and breakthroughs, all thanks to medieval visionaries who believed knowledge belonged to everyone bold enough to seek it. From the glasses perched on your nose to the clock ticking steadily on your wall, the fingerprints of medieval ingenuity are everywhere in our modern lives. These 30 inventions reveal a truth that history books too often overlook: the so-called Dark Ages were actually ablaze with innovation, problem-solving, and flashes of brilliance that still light our way today. Think about it. Every time you fasten a button, sip coffee from a mug, or check your watch, you're interacting with ideas born in an era we frequently dismiss as backward or stagnant. The Middle Ages weren't just a bridge between ancient and modern times. They were a workshop where craftsmen, scholars, and everyday people solved problems with creativity that feels startlingly contemporary. What makes these inventions truly remarkable isn't just their staying power, but how they transformed human experience in ways their creators could never have imagined. The mechanical clock didn't just tell time, it taught us to think in minutes and hours, reshaping entire societies around schedules and precision. Eyeglasses didn't merely correct vision, they extended careers, preserved knowledge, and proved that aging doesn't have to mean decline. Even something as simple as the button revolutionized fashion, turning clothing from shapeless sacks into expressions of identity and artistry. These weren't just tools, they were quiet revolutions that changed how we move through the world. So the next time you shuffle a deck of cards or ride a bike, take a moment to appreciate the medieval minds behind these everyday marvels. Their legacy reminds us that progress isn't always loud or sudden. Sometimes it's the whisper of a quill on parchment, the steady tick of a gear mechanism, or the satisfying click of a lock turning. Which of these 30 inventions surprises you most? Is it the university system that still shapes education today, the fishing reel that made angling an art? Or maybe the humble wheelbarrow that turned back-breaking labor into manageable work? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear which piece of medieval genius makes you see history differently. And if you enjoyed this journey through time, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon, because history isn't just about dates and dust. It's the living, breathing foundation of everything we use, create, and become. As we close this chapter, remember, the past isn't a foreign country, it's the blueprint for our present, hiding in plain sight from your kitchen drawers to your smartphone screen. The Middle Ages may be centuries behind us, but thanks to these ingenious creations, they're still very much with us, one clever idea at a time.